Friends, I welcome you to my channel. Before listening to this story, I will ask you to like and subscribe. It is not difficult for you, but it is pleasant for me. And we're starting. My name is Eva. I am married to a man named John Constantine. We met and got married when I was 23 and he was 26. He has a brother, Robert, a little older than him, and they both lived with their father, Salvatore, and mother, Charity. Bobby was also married, and his wife, Selena, lived with him. They were a wonderful and friendly family. My own parents are no longer alive. My mother and father died of cancer when I was still a teenager, and I was raised by Aunt Flossie, who took me in because she considered it her duty. Well, she also wanted to get money from my trust fund. My mother followed my father for a year after his death and, before her death, transferred all their joint assets into a monetary trust that she established for me. I didn't have any grandparents on either side, so my aunt remained my only living relative. She raised me in a strict Catholic spirit, forcing me to go to church every week. I know Aunt Flossie hated me, so I did everything she asked and tried very hard not to get in her way. So we tolerated each other until I turned 18. On that wonderful day, I packed up my few belongings and left her house. She didn't even bother to say goodbye to me. I knew that when I turned 18, the trust fund would be under my own control. Since my mother died, he has been paying my aunt a fairly decent amount every month. When I met with the banker who handled the affairs of this fund, he said that he would pay me a good allowance if I trusted him to manage it in the future. I told him that everything was fine, and he could continue to lead if he promised me that Aunt Flossie would not receive another cent of my money. He assured me that it would be so. He also informed me that I could go to college, and the foundation would pay for tuition and living expenses if I wanted to, or I could just periodically borrow the necessary amounts in cash. I decided to leave everything as it is and took the money only to enroll in a local vocational school, where I studied to be a dental hygienist. I wanted to start working faster, wishing that my place of work was close to my apartment. Then I would have the opportunity to find my own way in life. So, soon I got a job at a dentist near my apartment, and my professional career began. True to his word, the foundation paid for the course of study and still paid me a small allowance every month. Salvatore and his sons worked in the construction industry. Sal was a foreman, and his boys were workers of various specialties. John was a bricklayer, and Robert was a finisher. They were good at working together, and they always worked together as a team. The guys did not agree to work separately and together followed where Sal himself was going. He, in turn, forced them to work and made sure that they always had good orders. Yes, it was a friendly and close-knit family. That's how I met John. I went to school in the city center, next door to one of the construction projects they were working on. At lunchtime and during recess, I would leave the building to get some fresh air and take a break from the other students, who were all older than me. It was there that this handsome, well-built guy saw me and spoke to me. He told me that his name was John, and we began to look forward to each new meeting with each other while I continued my studies. John and I became very close friends, and one day he asked me out on a date. When he asked for the first time, I refused, but he did not back down, and I agreed to the next offer. We enjoyed each other in our meetings, and soon became a couple. Everything went on as usual, and we had been dating for 8 months before John asked me to marry him, and I agreed. We got married in a big ceremony attended by all his friends and relatives, and thus I became Eva Constantine, the wife of John Constantine. Instead of living with his parents, John moved into my apartment, where we lived for several years until we were able to buy a small house. We had a good life. I worked 4 days a week, and he brought in good money. John and I talked about the kids, but we decided to wait with them for now. We were happy and enjoyed each other and his family. I especially liked Selena, Bobby's wife. Bobby and Selena visited us almost as often as we visited John's parents ourselves. Selena once told me that she just likes to get away from Sal and Charity from time to time. Of course she loved them, but sometimes she wanted to be alone. Shortly after our wedding, Robert, John, and their father Salvatore Constantine opened their own small construction business. It was a dream for each of them, and now that both of his sons were married, Sal decided that it was time for them to join him and build a business together that would provide for his children and, subsequently, his grandchildren. Selena and I agreed to this, and both got jobs to help our husbands during this time. Selena worked as a secretary in a law firm with 14 lawyers, and I was still a dental hygienist. The two of us earned enough to help our beloved men at the initial stage, and both were sincerely happy about it. The first 2 years were not easy, but as the high quality of the Constantine family's work became more and more famous, their jobs were more stable, and the profits of the small company began to grow. Our men were able to hire a few more additional workers, and gradually the business continued to expand. 2 more years later, we were finally able to make some important life decisions. By that time, John and I had been married for a little over 5 years. Bobby and Selena had a baby, and she quit her job when she was already 5 months pregnant. Since business was going well, I reduced my working hours, and now I worked only 1 or 2 days a week. I tried not to give up while John and I worked on getting me pregnant ourselves, but until recently our efforts were unsuccessful. However, we had fun trying it over and over again, so we were both happy. Everything went on unchanged for another year or so before disaster struck. By that time, John and I had been married for a little over 7 years, but so far we had not made any further progress in trying to create a full-fledged family. Bobby and Selena's little daughter was already 16 months old at the time, and she was full of energy. Selena was a wonderful mother, and she and the baby often visited our house. I adored this little girl, and Selena and I were as close as sisters. Everything was going just fine. Sometime in September of that year, Selena confessed to me that she was pregnant again and would like to personally inform her parents about this joyful event, so she was going to take her daughter with her and visit her mother, who lived in upstate New York. This place was 4 hours away from our city, and she wanted me to go with them, but I had already agreed to work on another girl's shift since she was supposed to attend her sister's wedding. It was too late to refuse, and I had to stay, albeit with great regret. Selena couldn't wait to tell her mom about everything, so early in the morning she and her daughter left without me. In the years that followed, I thought about it over and over again and often wished I was there for them. But that day I was glad that Selena would see her mother soon and give her wonderful news. I only worked 4 hours that day, so I was home by lunchtime. I still remember John coming home from work earlier than usual. I asked him what he was doing at home so early, and he just looked at me with a dead look that made my heart ache. There was such pain on his face that I immediately rushed to him to see where he was injured, but he just reached out to me and hugged me tightly to his chest. He held me like that in silence for a long time, without saying a word, until I was seized with an unaccountable fear. I pulled away from him and asked John in a trembling voice what had happened. As of now, I absolutely remember the terrible words that my husband uttered. "They're both gone, Evie. Selena and baby Jess. They are no longer with us. So fast, God, too fast. Bobby is just devastated. He's almost going crazy. But Mom and Dad, they're with him now. But they're gone, Evie. They're dead and... Oh my God." John was crying and still desperately hugging me to his chest, but I pushed away and tried to grab his hands to somehow realize what had happened. "About what? God, John, what are you talking about?" "Selena and baby Jess were going to her mother's. They didn't leave. They just went to visit. Calm down, baby." John shook his head violently, his tears rolling down his cheeks and flying apart. He was literally shaking, and he reached out to hug me again, but I moved away from his reach. "John, talk to me. What's wrong with you, John?" I almost screamed in his face, clutching my husband's shoulders and trying to break through the despair that had taken over his mind. I felt like I should slap him, but I was afraid to do it when he was completely lost in his grief. The girls died in a car accident on an interstate highway. They're both dead, Evie. They're dead. They disappeared. Don't you understand? They both died. They died in that damn accident, and now they're not with us anymore." Suddenly it hit me, and I froze, as if stunned. He told me, "What? They're both dead. Selena and Jess, are they both dead?" Oh my God. Did Bobby know? Yes. John said he was with his mom and dad. God, it can't be. How can he bear it? Bobby must be completely crushed. I can't believe the pain he must be in, and yet I could understand. I knew how Bobby felt. I saw how painfully my mother was dying of cancer, and then I realized what death was. But now everything was different. A cheerful, beautiful wife and a precious baby daughter disappeared in the blink of an eye. Such a death was more cruel. She left no time for reconciliation or even for parting. Over the next few weeks, after the double funeral, Bobby tried to get back to work, but John said he didn't like it very much, and Sal had to send him home several times because he constantly made stupid mistakes and once almost seriously injured another worker. John watched what was happening, unable to do anything more than just stay close to Bobby. He was deeply worried because his brother was suffering. But, like everything else, life did not stand still, so it was necessary, no matter what, to grit your teeth and move forward. I did not give up trying to get pregnant, but everything was still unsuccessful. John and I talked about it and decided that having a baby now would be in the best interest of everyone, including Bobby. It would give him a chance to pack up, and it would be a miracle for Sal and Charity. So my husband and I kept trying. Slowly, gradually, Bobby began to come to his senses, spending a lot of time with us, especially on weekends, when work did not occupy all his attention. He started drinking a little more than usual, but it wasn't getting out of control yet. Bobby was never angry or aggressive, so we just let him be alone with his thoughts. He used to go out on the porch and spend most of the day there in an old armchair while John and I did chores around the house. So lately, Bobby has become almost an integral part of our home. Sal had applied for construction work in Fort Wayne, about 4 hours away, and he wanted Bobby and John to go to the construction site and talk to the developer. The application was pre-approved, but there were still some details that needed to be worked out on the spot. John was ready to go on a trip, but Bobby referred to other employment or something like that and said he would not be able to join his brother. They argued about it, and in the end John decided to go there alone. The round trip would only take a few hours, and the husband would have to return home late in the evening. After a tense conversation with his brother, Bobby left to be alone, and the subject was forgotten. That night, lying in bed, John and I talked about Bobby. John was worried that his brother seemed to be getting depressed again, and asked me to promise that I would look after him during his absence. Of course, I agreed, and we made love, trying again to conceive the child we both wanted so much. John was a patient lover, and I was always happy with our love life. A child would have been a welcome reward for our efforts, but John and I, in any case, still loved each other, and now even more than when we first became husband and wife. Everything that the two of us have been through has only increased our devotion to each other. John went to the construction site early Tuesday morning the following week. He took his pickup truck and his surveying tools, promising to be home by the evening of the same day. At parting, he reminded me to look after Bobby while he was gone, and I promised again. I wasn't working that day, so I was alone at home when Bobby suddenly showed up. It was only 11 o'clock in the morning, and I wondered why he came so early. "Bobby, what are you doing here so early? Why aren't you working? You told John that you had some business that made you unable to go with him. So what happened?" Bobby just shrugged and stared at the floor. He was behaving rather strangely, and I began to worry. He didn't seem like himself. "Well, come in if you want. I don't know what's going on, but John asked me to keep an eye on you. So come on, come inside already." Bobby came in, stood in the kitchen for a few minutes, as if thinking about something, and then went to the refrigerator, took a beer, and headed out onto the veranda. This already looked more familiar to him: beer and loneliness. I forgot about him for a while, doing my usual household chores during the day. By staying on the porch, Bobby could take care of himself. Sometime in the afternoon, having finished with my chores, I went out on the veranda to find Bobby. Strangely, he wasn't there, although I knew he hadn't gone anywhere. So I went looking for him and found him in his office, fast asleep on the couch. I watched him for a minute, but finally decided to let him rest. While Bobby was sleeping, he couldn't get into any trouble. It was past 6 o'clock in the evening when John called me and informed me that his old work truck had stalled. He himself had not yet left the construction site, but the car had been driven to a repair shop where mechanics took care of it. John didn't know what was going on, but he promised to call as soon as he found out something. I wanted him to leave his car there and rent a car to go home, but he wanted to wait and see if it could be fixed. All his surveying equipment remained in the cab and back of the pickup truck, and he didn't want to leave it if it could be avoided. We talked a little more, and then I hung up. "We'll have to wait until everything clears up." Bobby seemed sober and calm that evening, and that was good. We watched TV with him until John called again. It was already about 8:30 in the evening. "Hi, honey. We got the parts for the truck. and the guys are going to fix it first thing tomorrow morning. So today I'm going to rent a room and stay here. They promised to start work at 7 in the morning, so I think I can be back by noon. Okay, baby? Hurry home tomorrow, darling, but get a good night's sleep first, okay? I asked him. And think of me tonight when you sleep in your lonely bed. John laughed, promised, and then asked about Bobby. When I told him that he had been staying with us all day and that he would stay the night tonight, he seemed overjoyed. I thought he'd be upset that his brother was hanging around here instead of going with him, but John didn't think so. He said Bobby would be safer with me than if he went with him. He explained this by saying that the delay would most likely have led to a quarrel between them, so Bobby's absence from the construction site was preferable for John. To be honest, I didn't think so myself, but they were brothers anyway, and John probably knew better. We talked with him for a few more minutes, and then we said goodbye. Since it was already quite late, I decided to go to bed, and on my way to the bedroom, I looked into the living room to say goodnight to Bobby. I saw that he was already sleeping on the couch, so I just covered him with a blanket that we kept on the back of the couch. He was fast asleep and didn't move, so I turned off the mumbling TV and went upstairs to my bed. John was supposed to be home before noon, so I wanted to get a good night's sleep so I could get up early tomorrow and be ready when he arrived. That night, I dreamed of the dreary loneliness that Bobby must have felt, and that was enough to wake me up before dawn. Lifting my head on the pillow, I glanced at the clock, which showed 3:15 in the morning. I had slept for almost 4 hours, and now I absolutely did not want to fall asleep again. Then I decided to go downstairs to have a light snack at this shaky time of late night/early morning. If I drank some warm milk, it might make me want to take a nap for a couple more hours. Throwing back the covers, I went barefoot down the stairs, trying not to wake Bobby. I went into the kitchen and, leaving the light off, poured milk into a saucepan and put it on the stove before I heard a vague noise coming from the living room. I stood in the middle of the kitchen, holding my breath and listening, and I heard it again. It seemed to me that it sounded like crying, or rather a sobbing sob. I went quietly to the door to the living room and listened again. It was Bobby. Peering through the half-open door, I saw him sitting on the couch and hiding his face in his hands, his shoulders moving up and down as he sobbed with deep, heartbreaking sighs. I tiptoed back into the kitchen, turned off the stove, and returned to comfort Bobby. When I entered the room, I carefully sat down next to him on the sofa, hugged Bobby, and pulled his head to my shoulder. I wrapped both arms around him and started rocking back and forth with him, talking to him, saying whatever came into my head to try to calm him down. "It's okay, baby. Just let it go. Like that. Just let it come out. Crying is normal. That's it, baby, cry. Yeah, well, that's it." I talked to him, coaxed and whispered over and over until I felt him begin to relax in my arms. I felt the phlegm of Bobby's warm tears on my shoulder, and my soul was filled with pity and sympathy for him and his unhealed loss. I just wanted to comfort him and make the pain gnawing at his heart go away. I just held him and kept hugging him until he calmed down. For all those long minutes, I didn't even think about what I was wearing until I realized that Bobby's head had moved from my shoulder to my chest. I suddenly felt his warm breath warming my skin through the thin, almost transparent nightgown that I was wearing. It was John's favorite nightgown, and I was thinking about my husband when I put it on last night. I started to pull away from him, but his arms wouldn't let go of me, and the hug seemed to only get tighter. He turned me around and pulled me towards him so that I was almost face to face with him. I didn't know what to do. It was wrong. It shouldn't be like this. I was just about to say this to Bobby when he put his hand on the back of my head and pulled my lips to his. Damn, it all got out of control very quickly, but deep down I knew that Bobby was reacting instinctively to it because of the grief and pain that overwhelmed him. I should have and wanted to stop him, but on the other hand, pushing him away and getting mad at Bobby would surely make him feel even worse. Feelings of love and compassion still moved me, and I allowed Bobby to use my body to bring him mental relief. I was filled with compassion for this poor man who had lost so much and so quickly. He needed me, and I gave myself to him to ease his unbearable pain and suffering a little. I knew that what we had done could never be told to John or his parents. Although I gave myself to Bobby out of compassion and empathy, John would never understand it. In this act, Bobby meant nothing to me except that he was a member of the family. I gave him what I would have given John if he needed me. It was love, but not the kind of love that leads to lust. It was love for our family. Bobby finally got up and rolled over me onto an empty part of the couch. When he saw my nakedness, he quickly turned his head to find his own clothes. When I had the opportunity to get up, I grabbed my negligee and put it on, despite its modest size and translucency. Bobby pulled on his pants and sat back down on the couch next to me. "You probably hate me for this," he muttered, lowering his head and not looking into my eyes. I do not know what came over me. I just needed someone who, and you were so understanding, and your voice was so soft, and I just lost control. "Can you forgive me? Please?" Instead of answering, I just reached out and touched his shoulder. I forced him to stand up, turned his head towards me, and looked him straight in the eyes. "Bobby, you were hurt, and I did everything I could to help. You don't have to be sorry. I let you have my body to try to ease your pain and suffering. That's all that happened." Bobby's lips parted in a slow smile, and he seemed to feel a great relief. He tried to find words to express his feelings to me, but I just took his hand and led him to my bedroom. "Stay with me tonight. Let me help you forget about everything, if only for this one night," I told him. "Are you sure?" he asked. "Yes, I'm sure. I can give it to you, but only this one time." He followed me to my room. I took off my nightgown, crawled under the covers, and watched him undress and lie down on the other side. I stretched out my arms, and he moved closer to me. We were both lying on our sides. I realized what I had done just as I reached the climax. I didn't do it out of compassion. Almost physically, I felt a burning wave of agonizing shame wash over me, and I wanted to cry, but I couldn't let Bobby see it. Like a somnambulist, I slid out of bed and went to the bathroom to wash away the traces of this crime as soon as possible. When I saw my own reflection in the mirror, I couldn't stand it and burst into uncontrollable tears. I betrayed my husband twice that night, first out of pity and then out of lust. A spasm of sickening nausea rose in my throat, and I collapsed to my knees over the toilet. My stomach was painfully clenching over and over again. My head was spinning, and I felt very sick. I stayed there for what seemed like hours, but eventually slowly raised my head, and then stood up on shaky legs and somehow washed my face. All this time, I purposely avoided looking at myself in the mirror. When I came out of the bathroom, Bobby was no longer in the bedroom. I put on my negligee and wrapped my robe over my nightgown, then went down the hall in search of it, but only heard the front door slam. Bobby was gone. I felt relieved, and in a sense, I was even glad he was gone, since I was absolutely not eager to talk to him right now. "Maybe we'll talk later, after what happened becomes less painful." I went back to bed, but I couldn't sleep at the first glimmer of dawn that followed the night of my fall. The next few days were difficult for me. John didn't suspect anything, and I didn't say a word about what happened. And Bobby hasn't been to our place since he left that morning. When John returned home the next day, we made love that evening, and I admit I was more persistent than usual, trying to erase from my memory what happened to Bobby. Being in bed with my husband, I could enjoy my lustful side with a clear conscience, and I did it. Several times. John liked my activity and was surprised by it, but I just told him that I was having a lot of fun playing our games while we were trying to have a baby. My love for John finally gave me the opportunity to forget about Bobby. Bobby arrived at the end of that week, and he and I just smiled at each other, behaving the way we usually did before, and everything seemed fine again. Seizing the moment, I warned Bobby that we both needed to just forget about everything that happened between us that night, and he assured me that he felt the same way himself. We parted in agreement, and everything went back to normal. Bobby's mood really improved, and he began to show interest in work again. John and Sal noted this fact with approval, and they both felt that Bobby had finally overcome his life difficulties. I hope that it was because of me that he managed to change his situation so much, but even if he did, it would remain my secret. John and I continued to work on creating our full-fledged family, but nothing seemed to happen in this direction. My period was delayed, but there was nothing unusual about it. It used to happen that delays reached up to 3 months, but I still couldn't get pregnant, so I haven't thought about it yet. John became more depressed every week and eventually decided to see a doctor. I just laughed at that and suggested he just wait, because we were still getting mutual pleasure from our attempts. The process itself has not yet turned into a routine job. In the end, he agreed, and our family life returned to its usual rut. It wasn't until 2 months later that I found out for sure that I was pregnant. John and I have been trying our best to create this little miracle for more than a year, having made countless attempts during this time, and thank God, this finally happened. I looked at the plastic stick in my hand again, just to make sure, but there were still 2 pink lines on it. Pregnant. I almost burst into tears with joy because it was such a long-awaited event in my life with John. I put the wand in a small plastic bag and threw it in the trash. I didn't want John to see her until I had prepared a little surprise for the moment when I told him about this great news. Yoo-hoo, I was pregnant. I was too happy to try to contain my feelings and emotions. But I shouldn't have given away my emotions for the time being. I wanted everything to be perfect at the very moment when I would tell John about myself and our future child. After lunch, I went shopping for a new nightgown and some things for dinner that I knew John would be very happy about. I cooked a great dinner. Lobster with melted butter, medium-rare steak, baked potatoes with sour cream and green onions, a vegetable dish of cauliflower, peas and carrots, and for dessert a chocolate cake with ice cream. I wanted everything to be perfect that evening, so I carefully prepared each dish using the recipes that Charity, his mother, gave me. I called John to clarify that he would be home by 6:30 p.m., and that's when I planned our dinner. Everything was ready. Just before John arrived, I went upstairs and put on my new, almost transparent nightgown. It looked so unusual that it seemed like I wasn't wearing anything. I draped a matching silk robe over it, which only made everything underneath look even more mysterious and seductive. Neither the nightgown nor the robe were meant to conceal, but only to tempt. That's exactly what I wanted. John should have succumbed to my seduction charms, but first I would have forced him to taste my viands, then I would have told him the news, and finally he would have taken me to bed, where I would have shown my husband all my love and devotion to himself and our new family. Our evening started the way I had planned. John returned home on time, and when he entered, he was caught off guard by my seductive attire, but I just smiled hopefully and didn't say anything to him yet. I put everything in its place in advance, and the table looked great. As I served the dishes, I was happy to watch John's face brighten. We had a really pleasant and relaxed hour at dinner, and I, like him, enjoyed eating. For a few minutes, I forgot about my news and just enjoyed a wonderful meal and a conversation with my husband. It was truly perfect. No, it wasn't just perfect, it was magical. I waited until we were done and told John to go into the living room and I'd bring coffee in a few minutes. After putting the coffee pot on, I put the remaining lobsters and meat in the refrigerator. I left everything else until morning. I made coffee, put the cups and other accessories on a tray, and took everything to the living room. Leaving the tray on the coffee table, I sat down next to John on the couch while I poured the coffee, which exuded a faint smoke and a wonderful smell for both of us. As soon as he leaned back on the couch, I sighed and relaxed. That's the time. You've probably been wondering why I cooked this special dinner for you and why I'm dressed like this. I need to tell you something, and I wanted everything to be perfect. John was looking at me now, and I saw that there was an expression of mild concern on his face. I decided to do it quickly so as not to torment him with suspense. There's nothing wrong with what I'm going to say, John. On the contrary, this is the best news in the world. You know how hard we tried to have a baby, right? So, guess what? You're going to be a father. I looked at him, expecting that now a joyful light would flash in his eyes, and his face, which I loved so much, would light up with the most sincere adoration and happiness. But instead, I saw him frown at first, and then an expression appeared on him that in a few seconds turned his beloved face into a mask of angry contempt. It was as if something had suddenly snapped inside me. I was lost and felt the approach of some terrible, irreparable catastrophe. Well, what happened all of a sudden? After all, John always wanted children as much as I did. So why was he angry? I recoiled from him, seeing the inexplicable hatred on his face, and began to cry. Well, my God, what went wrong? John, what's the matter? What? God, why are you looking at me like that? This is our child. This is what we have been striving for so long. This is what we both wanted. Please, Honey, talk to me. What happened? John seemed to be fighting with himself, trying to squeeze out the words, but all he could do was stutter and sputter. So convulsively distorted was his face. He struggled with the anger raging inside him and, after making a Herculean effort, finally managed to control himself enough to answer me. I had some news myself for tonight, but they weren't as terrible as the news you just told me, he said gloomily, as if he was struggling to get out of himself word by word. Today I visited Dr. Jeffers, and he informed me about the results of the tests that I did last week. Guess what, my loving wife? I'm infertile. Yes, that's right. I'm pregnant. That is, I'm not capable of having children. It happened when I was still a child. The shock of his words was like someone had given me a scalding slap in the face. I felt the blood drain from my face, and suddenly I couldn't get enough air. My breathing became shallow and rapid, and I felt dizzy. I tried to stand up, but my legs were shaking and wouldn't hold me. It was hard for me to focus on anything. Incoherent thoughts were racing in my head, and I wanted only one thing: to run away. As far away as possible and as fast as possible. I was completely confused and scared. I absolutely couldn't accept what I had just heard from John. I got up with difficulty and took a step, but only to stumble and fall to the floor. Instinctively, I managed to put out my hand to steady myself, and a sudden pain shot through my wrist and knee, which I hit the floor with, brought me back to reality. That's it. What did you say? What does sterile mean? I'm pregnant, John, I exclaimed, holding out my hands to my husband. How can I get pregnant if you are infertile? This is unimaginable. And that's when it hit me. Oh my God. The baby wasn't John's, it was Bobby's. Well, God, what have I done? What have I done to my husband and to my own life? I dropped my hands, turned away from John, and stumbled into the bedroom. Slamming the door behind me, I locked it from the inside with shaking hands, and then threw myself face down on the bed. I couldn't look my husband in the eye right now. What have I done? God, forgive me for. How? How could I do that? I stayed in my room for the rest of the evening and all night. I didn't know where John was, or what he was doing, or even if he was still in the house. God, our house. It is unlikely that it will remain my home in the near future. John was a wonderful and very understanding man, but as a husband, he would never tolerate infidelity. We have talked about this many times in the past, seeing how our friends break up and seemingly strong marriages are destroyed because of infidelity. His family has always been very important to him, and he would never do anything to endanger it. But I did it. And the bitter irony was that it was the family I was trying to help that caused my downfall. My sisterly love for Bobby and my deep compassion for his pain have become my sin and curse. The next morning, I dared to go down to the kitchen, dreading what I might find there, but John was nowhere to be found, nor were there any notes or anything else that could tell me where he had gone. I didn't even know if he stayed the night last night or left immediately after our conversation. I had no choice but to wait. I called work and said I couldn't come today and might have to take the rest of the week off. I did my best to prepare myself for everything that could be waiting for me in the near future. However, there was nothing good ahead. After thinking about what else I could do, I decided to try calling Bobby. I had to tell him that John had found out about my cheating, and it would soon become clear that Bobby was the most likely candidate. At least, that's what I thought John would think. Just in case, I decided to call him on his cell phone first. I dialed the number and waited. Hello? Eve? Bobby's voice came on the line. Yes, Bobby. It's me. I have to tell you something. Well, I'm pregnant, and the baby is yours. I do not know if John has already understood this, but you have to be very careful. Do you hear me? Why should I be careful? Wait, isn't that his child? My God, Eva, we've only been together once. How can this be my child? He bombarded me with questions. John is infertile. He's been like this all his life. He just didn't know about it until last night. He told me about it only yesterday, when I was thinking of making him happy that I was pregnant. Now he's gone, and God, I don't know where he is. He never said a word to me after he told me about his infertility. Bobby, I'm so scared, and I don't know what to do. Just be careful. I hung up without giving him time to ask any other questions or ask me not to worry. I knew John, and of course I was worried. Bobby, anyway, especially for best weapon in, it's worth being careful, but maybe John won't guess his role in my disaster. Now my life was in total shit, and I had no idea how it was going to end, but I didn't want Bobby to be a part of it. The further he stays away from John and me, the better it will be. I gathered all my remaining courage and just kept waiting, wondering how things would turn out next. I didn't have to wait long. The phone rang, and I hurried to answer it. One half of me prayed that it was John, while the other half was afraid to hear his harsh voice and wished that it was not a call from him. "Hello, John. It's you?" I asked weakly, trying to keep my voice from shaking. "It's me. Are you alone?" "Of course, I'm alone. Where are you, John? Are you coming home? We need to talk. You have to come home so we can talk." "John? I'll be there in half an hour. Where are you?" He had already hung up the phone, and the only response to my last words was an impassive beep. I put down my phone and wondered how I was going to handle all this. Should I tell John the truth? God, how did I get into this mess? If I tell the truth, I will cause problems between John and his brother. If I lie, then, without any doubt, I will lose my marriage. If I tell the truth, I have a chance. There is a small, but still a chance that John will understand the compassion shown to a member of his family who was in excruciating pain after the tragic death of his wife and daughter. If I lie, then I won't have a single chance that if he finds out about it himself, he'll ever forgive me. To lie or not to lie? It seems like the only chance for me was the truth. True to his word, John was there in less than half an hour. As always, he entered through the front door and, without saying a word, went to the kitchen for a beer. After uncorking the bottle, he returned to the living room, where I was waiting for him. John sank into a deep armchair opposite me, took the first sip from the bottle and put it on the armrest, silently watching me. I couldn't tell from his inscrutable face what he was thinking, so I just waited, not knowing where to start. There was a tense silence between us. I decided to put the initiative in my husband's hands and let him speak first. "Well, how are you doing?" He finally broke the silence that was becoming unbearable. "Are you seeing anyone? Although, what am I talking about? Of course you're dating. You're pregnant, so you must have been dating someone. How could I be so stupid?" I tried to stifle a small sob, but I couldn't. It sounded like a hiccup when I tried to hold back the sound. Well, that's exactly how it was supposed to be. Cruel words. But I deserved them. Okay, if I was going to lose it all, I wasn't going to give up without a fight. John knew me and knew that I wouldn't let him treat me like a whore. I knew I had done the wrong thing, but I was neither a fallen woman nor a cheater. "I'm not dating anyone, and I've never met anyone," I retorted angrily. "It was only once, and yes, it happened, but I didn't throw myself at anyone. It just happened. I can tell you about it if you want to listen, but if you prefer to mock me, I'll wait until you're done." "Oh, well, the best defense is an attack, right?" John grimaced. "Well, why don't you tell me everything, and we can both have a good laugh. Tell me about your boyfriend. I'll listen to it." So, here it is, the very moment of truth. The time has come. How can this be done? All I could think of was to tell the truth and the die would be cast, one way or another. When you went to Fort Wayne a couple of months ago and had to stay there overnight, you remember that Bobby came and stayed with us that day? I stumbled in mid-sentence and staggered back when John jumped up from his chair and grabbed me by the throat with one jerk. He kept his hand on my neck, and I felt it begin to tighten. But after a few seconds, he stopped himself with a curse. It cost him a tremendous amount of willpower, but he stopped anyway. My husband has never raised his hand against me in anger, but this time was almost his first. Instead of pulling away and cowering, I lifted my head, exposing my neck to the force of his anger, and waited, even though everything inside me was shaking and turning over. In the end, John unclenched his petrified fingers, releasing me, and stepped back with a darkened face. He went to the sofa and sat down again, resting his elbows on his knees, clasping his fingers in the lock and resting his forehead on them. "Go on. Tell me everything," I heard his muffled voice. John forgot about his beer and no longer looked at me, staring at the floor. Well, that's what I did. I told him about how I heard Bobby crying at night, went up to him and hugged him. I told him how it was, and how I tried to comfort his brother. I tried to make him understand how I felt at that moment and how we were just together, giving comfort to each other and trying to numb the pain that was gnawing at our hearts. I asked John if he remembered how much better Bobby got over the next few weeks and that it was worth it to help him get through this terrible period in his life. He was in incredible pain, and no one in his family could help him in any way. That's all that really happened between us. Just once and never again. I knew out of the corner of my mind that I hadn't told him about the second time with Bobby that happened that night, but I thought it was bad enough for John to know that I once made love to his brother. I had to endure the shame of it alone. That was the end of it. I just had to wait. Everything was in John's hands now. I told almost the whole truth, and I could only wait for his decision to find out if I had a future with my husband. But while I was waiting, he didn't say anything. My husband was staring at the floor, and he wasn't looking at me. His lips moved as if he were whispering something, but no matter how hard I strained my ears, I couldn't make out a word. I was getting more and more nervous when he continued to sit motionless in front of me, hunched over and not even looking up. In the end, I couldn't stand it and vented my disappointment. "Well, don't you have anything to say? Aren't you going to yell at me and call me bad names? Because I deserve it. Anything. I admit that I deserve all this. Just say something, for God's sake. Don't be silent." Finally, he raised his head and looked at me, but I didn't see anything on his face. That's right. No emotions, just emptiness. Just a cold, dead look that was worse than any words. But at least he did talk. "When you offered Bobby that comfort of yours," John seemed to spit out the last word. "What did he do? Did he say, 'No, I can't do this,' or 'this is wrong,' or anything else to try to stop you?" "Well, no. Actually, Bobby was the one who started it, but I let it go on. So, no, he didn't try to stop me." "That's exactly what I thought." John's voice rasped like a rusty, unoiled hinge. It was addressed to me, but then he started mumbling as if he was talking to himself. I could hear his words, but he wasn't talking to me. So he was the one who started it all. I should have guessed. I should have suspected. But no, I thought, he's my brother, so I have nothing to worry about. He wouldn't do that anymore. At these words, John got up from the couch and, without saying anything else, turned and walked out the front door, slamming it behind him. I was so surprised that I didn't even try to stop him. By the time I woke up, he was gone, and I heard his car driving away. All that day, I was on pins and needles waiting for something terrible to happen, but nothing happened. I tried to call John on his cell phone, but all my calls were automatically dropped to voicemail. It was the same with Bobby. In the end, I gave up and just waited. But still nothing happened. Even time itself seemed to stand still. After making myself a small lunch, I wondered if I should call Sal or Charity. I had no idea if John had told them what had happened or where he had been staying since he left last night. After much thought, I decided to wait and let John decide for himself what to do next. By evening, there was still no news for me, neither good nor bad. John apparently decided to punish me with his silence and absence from the house. Bobby wouldn't contact me right now, so I couldn't expect to hear from him either. Since I am not one of those who endure their suffering in stoic silence, I finally decided to call Charity and see if she would agree to meet with me. I found her at home and talked to her for a minute to find out if she knew anything about what was going on. It quickly became obvious that John and Bobby's mother didn't know anything. Then I decided to tell her everything right away and see what she could advise to solve the problem. I asked Charity if she could meet me outside the house, perhaps at Danny's Cafe, which was located on the corner next to her and Sal's house. She, with some surprise in her voice, agreed to the meeting, saying that she would be waiting for me there. I packed up quickly and left immediately, arriving just as she appeared there. We chose a booth and sat down at a table. "So tell me what secret I sensed in your voice," Charity demanded. "I know you have something to tell me, and I hope it's good news." "Well, Charity, I'm pregnant. I'm going to have a baby soon, and I'm almost 3 months old." As if diving into icy water, I stunned my mother-in-law with the news. Her face broke into a happy smile, and she stood up and leaned across the table to put her arms around my shoulders and kiss me hard. Charity suffered greatly from the loss of Selena and her little granddaughter, almost as much as Bobby himself. She and Sal wanted grandchildren as passionately as John, and I wanted to give them to his parents. Charity, please let me tell you something before you continue. I lowered my eyes in embarrassment, pulling away from her a little. I really need your help. Give me your word that you'll listen to me before you say anything? Of course, honey, but you should be happy. That's great news, my girl. Charity, the baby is not John's. It's from Bobby. Her mouth fell open. She straightened up in her seat and stared at me as if I had gone crazy right in front of her eyes. Charity was trying to make sense of this incredible, impossible information, and she just couldn't seem to absorb it. Her face turned red as she leaned back in her chair and began to breathe very fast. It was a real battle, but in the end she pulled herself together. Charity lowered her head, unclenched her fists, and rubbed her temples with her fingers before raising her eyes and looking at me with a completely different look, with contempt on her face. How can this be? You and Bobby? Bobby, who just lost his wife and child. What is it? How could you? Tell me, how could you stab my son in the back after sleeping with his brother? Charity banged her fist on the table, raising her voice. It wasn't like that. I had to hurry before Charity's rising anger made her lash out and hit me, or worse. I asked you to give me the opportunity to tell the truth before blaming me for everything. Don't you want to listen to me? She continued to breathe quickly and heavily, glared at me with a withering look for a little longer, but finally stopped, looked at her clenched fists, crumpled one of the napkins, and relaxed a little. My mother-in-law looked at me with a more restrained look and told me to continue. I imperceptibly exhaled the air that I had been unconsciously holding all this time, and continued my confession. I didn't have an affair with Bobby, and we were together only once. It happened almost 3 months ago, and that evening John had to go to Fort Wayne for work, and then he called and said he would have to stay there overnight. Charity listened attentively to my story, frowning and slightly pursing her lips. After he left, Bobby came to our house because he wasn't up to going anywhere with John that day. He spent the whole day with us and wanted to stay the night because it was too painful and lonely for him to be alone. I talked to John when he called and told him that Bobby was with us. He said he was glad because Bobby shouldn't be alone. I agreed with him on that, and Bobby went to sleep on the couch in the living room. I stopped to drink some water and watch Charity's face. She looked away when I mentioned Bobby's pain, and her eyes glistened wetly with tears. I knew that both Sal and Charity were very worried about their youngest son during this difficult time for him, as well as for the fact that they could not do anything to ease his pain. But Charity didn't interrupt me now and seemed ready to listen to the rest of the story, so I continued my confession. I went downstairs last night to drink some warm milk to help me sleep, and I heard Bobby crying in the living room. I went in and hugged him to ease his grief. You have to understand. After all, you probably saw his suffering and felt helpless, unable to help him. I was just trying to support him and make it clear that he's not alone. God, he was crying so hard, and I hugged him tightly, and then I stumbled. Then he began to caress me. I can't explain what happened after that, only that I was overwhelmed with compassion, and I didn't want to cause Bobby any more pain by pushing him away and reacting to it with my angry reaction. And after that, everything else happened. Charity was now openly crying after hearing how much pain Bobby was in. It was a mother's sadness for her son, the son she couldn't help. I just let her cry, realizing the irony of the situation. I sat across from her and just humbly waited for Charity to calm down. Several minutes passed while she mourned the ruined life of her youngest son. I knew that telling her probably wouldn't change anything, but I hoped it would allow Charity to understand exactly what happened and how I let it happen. Finally, Charity blew her nose into a handkerchief and spoke again a minute later. Eva, I understand that you were trying to comfort my son, but I don't understand how you and Bobby allowed this to happen. You're John's wife, and you have no right to let things go as far as they did. Your compassion is welcome, but your lack of self-control is not. You were wrong as much as my son was wrong. But that's not all. Now Charity looked me in the eye and told me about the real depth of the problem. You didn't know that, but Selena was John's girlfriend before she married Bobby. It was Bobby who stole her from John, and it caused a big rift between my sons. It wasn't Selena's fault, and we never blamed her, because she was really in love with Bobby. She couldn't help her feelings and told John bluntly that she didn't love him the way Bobby did. Charity sighed sadly and twirled her ring on her ring finger with thoughtful sadness. But John never got over it and accused Bobby of stealing Selena from him. For a long time, there was a strong dislike between them, until John finally came to terms with what had happened over time. Selena often talked to him and continued to talk, until she convinced him that Bobby was not the reason for her leaving him. It was her decision, and only her decision, and her own feelings, which you can't order. It had been almost a year since their marriage before John gave up. I never believed that he completely forgave Bobby, but at least he really tried. And now, you and Bobby. Another stab in the back for John. Charity finished her story with a frown. It was only now that I began to understand why John said what he said when he left me. He blamed Bobby again, and I think I could understand why. Even if, for my part, I didn't tell either my husband or Charity the whole truth. But what about Bobby now? And where is he? I couldn't know that for sure. What can I do, Charity? Will John be able to forgive me? And will he forgive Bobby? I asked the mother of both sons in despair, hoping that she would somehow calm my restless heart. I don't know, baby. I can only try to talk to him if he comes back. I don't even know where they both are right now. Sal didn't say anything about it, but he was worried that something was wrong with them. He only said that they quarreled and then went somewhere together. It was this afternoon. Now I'm really worried. Did they quarrel and go somewhere together? It could end badly if John felt that Bobby had betrayed him again. And Bobby could feel the same way, so it wasn't any better. What have I done? Now I realize that I had been stupid, no matter what my inner motives were. I should have seen what it would lead to, but I let it happen anyway. So everything that happened between Bobby and me was on my conscience. I have to go home and hope John calls me or comes back, I said. I have to talk to him and make him understand that there's nothing wrong with what we've done. The child still belongs to his blood, his family, and he will love him no matter what. I know that he can love the baby if only he lets go of his anger. I'll tell him. He will have to understand this. Charity shook her head and sighed. My words didn't seem to convince her too much. I don't know, baby. A deep rage raged inside John for a long time, which he had been holding back for so long. Maybe what happened to you and Bobby. It was enough for his suppressed anger to burst out again. Only time will tell. Go now. I'll talk to Sal and tell him your story. I'll be in touch. I said goodbye to Charity, left the cafe, and returned back to the house to get bogged down in waiting again. I was ready to wait until John let me tell him how much I still loved him and how desperately I wanted him back in my arms and in my bed. I was ready to wait as long as it took. I stayed in the house for the next 3 days, waiting to hear from John or even Charity. I had no idea where he might be or why he hadn't called, even if it was to send me to hell in anger or something like that. Any action from him, anything would be preferable to this endless, exhausting wait. But, having no other choice, I had to wait. On the 4th day after I informed John of my pregnancy, he returned home. I was sitting at the kitchen table, trying to eat something, even though I hadn't had an appetite for a long time, when he came in and sat down at the table opposite me. I dropped my fork and leaned back in my chair, relieved but also afraid. So the time has come. Now I am face to face with what I have been waiting for so long, and what I was painfully afraid of. I'm glad you're home, I said, struggling to control myself. I was worried about you, not knowing where you were or what you were doing. I just hoped you wouldn't do something stupid, although I made them myself. John was looking at me with a strange expression on his face. I had never seen anything like it before, and I was scared. It was a cruel, hateful look, and I knew it was directed at me. I was still not afraid that John might cause me physical pain, but at the same time, every day I had less and less hope for our prosperous future together. However, at least he was here now, and that was the only thing I was grateful to him for. Somehow, something had to happen. I talked to Robert. He began to drop words as heavy as concrete blocks. I told him we weren't brothers anymore. From this day on, I will have nothing to do with him. He betrayed me too often. The child you are carrying will never belong to him, and he will never be allowed to see it. John got up and began pacing around the small kitchen, head down, hands clasped behind his back and looking down at his feet. I saw how tightly his jaw was clenched and how tense the bulging muscles of his powerful arms were. He could barely contain his anger. Holding my breath, I waited for what else he would say next. While you were guilty of infidelity, his guilt was betrayal. The betrayal of our marriage, the betrayal of me as your brother, the betrayal of our family and lust for your brother's wife. None of this can be forgiven this time. If this had happened the first time, it's possible that we could. Without finishing, John shrugged his shoulders and walked from corner to corner again. But it wasn't like that, and he knew it. And yet he went on, encouraged by yours, non-resistance. Together, you two betrayed me. I started up and tried to raise my voice, wanting to interrupt what he was talking about and trying to correct him in many things. But he turned to face me, and that frightening, withering look was enough to pin me to the spot and silence me in mid-sentence. I couldn't muster the necessary courage to argue with him face to face. I'll talk to my father and mother and tell them about my conversation with Robert and what you two did behind my back. I'm moving in with them, and Robert will have to leave immediately. And I'm staying with my parents until you give birth. After a brief pause, John stopped at the exit of the kitchen and finished. I will not divorce you, because then the child will be born illegitimate, and I cannot allow that. After the baby is born, we will talk about what we should do next. Slamming his palm against the door jamb and without saying another word, John went upstairs to our bedroom to pack some clothes and his things. My first thought was to run after him and beg him, but deep down I knew there was no hope. It wasn't just my physical betrayal that hurt him. His brother had betrayed him for the second time in his life, and he couldn't accept it. In this situation, I was just collateral damage. If it had been someone other than his brother, I might have had some chance. Not now. That's how John left, and for the next few weeks I didn't see him once. By this time, I was almost 4 months pregnant, but I was still able to move around normally on my own. John made sure that there was always money in our shared checking account, and I used it only for food and house maintenance. I didn't buy anything for myself and kept careful records of all my expenses. I don't even know why I did it, but I kept doing it. Nothing else has changed in my life. Once, though, I tried to call Charity, but Sal answered the phone and made it clear in no uncertain terms that she would not talk to me. Without saying another word, Sal hung up the phone. Well, the family's attitude towards me was made very clear. By my calculations, 17 weeks had passed when I started to feel cramps. Of course, I read about pregnancy and was sure that there was nothing terrible about it. I lay down, tried to relax and really dozed off for a while, but at some point I woke up from a sudden pain. I sat up in bed with my legs down, wrapped my arms around my stomach, and was already starting to worry when I suddenly felt a sharp pain in the pelvic area. It was like an electric shock. My legs buckled, and, screaming, I fell to my knees, bracing my hands on the floor. Now I was very scared, and I didn't understand what was happening to me. Gathering my strength, I crawled to the phone, picked up the receiver and dialed 911. When I heard someone's female voice, I said that I was pregnant and in serious condition and told her my address. She was talking and talking, asking me to stay on the line, but I just couldn't. The voice on the phone sounded farther away and became thinner, like a mosquito squeak. The walls swirled in front of my eyes, and I lost consciousness. I woke up in the hospital, surrounded by white on all sides. The walls themselves, the covers on me, the ceiling and the floor. Everything was completely white. The light hitting my eyes was so bright that I covered them with my hand and tried to focus on the picture in my mind. Where have I been? What happened to me? My thoughts were spinning erratically, and it was very quiet around me. As I lay there, struggling with my own memory, I suddenly remembered the intense pain. The pain that tore at my stomach. A child. What happened to my child? I opened my eyes and squinted, trying to give them time to adjust to the blinding white light surrounding me. Several long seconds passed, or minutes before I started to see again and made out a table next to the bed with a nurse call button on it. I pressed it and didn't let go, waiting for someone to show up and tell me if my baby was okay. It seemed to me almost 5 minutes before someone entered my room, approached me and snatched the call button from my fingers. I realized it was a nurse, but to me she was just a dark shadow, and her head was surrounded by a halo of light behind her. I couldn't make out any more details, except that this woman took away the call button and pushed it away from me on the table. Well, that's good, I heard her say. I see you've finally woken up. How are you feeling? Does it hurt anywhere, or do you feel uncomfortable? As she spoke, she took my pulse and wrote something down in my chart. Then she put a blood pressure cuff on my arm and, after the procedure, recorded this data as well. The nurse put her cool hand on my forehead and nodded after a second, as if everything was just fine. What happened to me? I asked her weakly. Is my child all right? What have you done to me? Ask you. Please tell me what happened. I'll ask the doctor to come to you as soon as I can find him. He's on the floor somewhere, so it won't take long. And you just relax and have a rest. He'll be right there. Don't worry, she replied in a soothing tone. Is there anything you can tell me? Anything at all? I begged. I don't know anything, dear. The doctor will tell you everything. Just wait until I find him, this woman said, straightening my blanket. After that, she left the room, and I was left in complete obscurity, pressed by a lot of unanswered questions. Physically, I felt somehow different than before, but I didn't know exactly how or why. Sliding my hands under the covers, I felt my stomach, but strangely enough, I didn't feel anything below my chest. I wiggled my toes, and it seemed to me that they moved, but again, I wasn't sure about that. Then I tried to pull back the blankets, but the nurse tucked them in too tightly for me to move them in my weakened state. I lay back on the pillow and just waited, too tired to try anything else. While I was waiting so long, at least someone or something, I imperceptibly dozed off again. I woke up to a slight shake on my shoulder and a voice asking if I was ready to get up. Opening my eyes a little, I saw a young man in a white coat, with an indispensable stethoscope around his neck. He was quite handsome, and I, coming out of my half-asleep, drugged state, unconsciously smiled at him without even thinking about it. Shaking off the remnants of sleep, I was able to lift my head a little, and the doctor put a pillow under my shoulders, allowing me to lift up enough so that I could see the rest of the bed and the room I was in. Resting my still weak hands on the bed, I tried to move my body higher to the headboard of the bed and finally was able to assume an almost sitting position. The young doctor bent down and did some kind of manipulation with the bed, and this lifted me up even more. I was finally able to sit almost straight. What happened to me, doctor? Why am I here? I remember calling 911, but after that, nothing. I must have fainted. How did I get here? What can you tell me? I asked him all the questions that had been bothering me all this time. You called the rescue service and gave them your address. The paramedics found you unconscious on the floor and were able to get you to the hospital on time. You were bleeding heavily, and you lost a lot of blood. They stabilized your condition and brought you here urgently. We managed to get your body under control, and we finally stopped the bleeding. The doctor paused and put his hand over mine, looking into my eyes. However, I have to tell you that you've lost a child. The bleeding was too much, and he didn't stand a chance. We had to have an abortion to save your life. I lost my baby. The shock was so strong that I could hardly bear it, or even realize it. The white walls of the ward spun in front of my eyes. The doctor's worried voice faded away. I think I lost consciousness again, and I didn't remember anything else until the next morning. I woke up in a smaller room, where the indispensable curtain blocking my bed was pulled back this time, allowing me to see the door and the second bed standing next to it, now empty. At least these walls had some color, pale green, with ugly brown edging. I was definitely in a hospital room right now. The nurse came in shortly after I woke up and took my vital signs. As she wrote down the data, she smiled and finally told me that I looked good. Everything seemed to be fine. This pretty woman fussed around the bed, straightening the covers and fluffing my pillow every now and then, as if she were my mother. The nurse was still with me when the same young doctor came into the room with whom I had started but never finished the conversation the day before. He asked her to stay while he examined me more thoroughly, which he did immediately. Eventually, he straightened up and announced that I was fine. You scared us a lot, honey, when you came here last night, but you turned out to be a real fighter. We have brought you to a stable condition, and everything else is your own merit. In a day or so, you will be able to return home. How are you feeling now? What is it? He asked, looking intently into my eyes. I feel myself. I don't even know. So strange. No pain or discomfort, but everything feels different. I feel like. It's like I'm empty. Is that okay, doctor? Yes, it's okay. You lost a lot of blood, and although the fetus was very small, it was still present, and your body still feels the difference. However, this feeling should pass very quickly. Who gave you permission to operate on me? I asked him slowly, trying to clench my weak fingers into fists. We called your husband, and he rushed here almost immediately. He gave his consent to carry out the necessary procedures. Your husband told us that you were the top priority and the child was secondary. Therefore, we did what we had to do, guided by his wishes. I just nodded my head mechanically, listening to the doctor talk about taking care of myself and not taking risks until I got stronger. At the end of his speech, he said he would call John and let him know the time when I would be discharged. Since I had no one else besides my husband, I left everything as it is. John will either come for me or not. That's up to him. It didn't depend on me. When the doctor left, I curled up on the bed, crying for my unborn child, whom I was never destined to see or hold in my arms. I continued to sob softly until I fell asleep. The next day, just after 10 a.m., I was discharged from the hospital. I put on the clothes John had obviously left for me and sat on the bed, waiting for the orderly with the wheelchair to come for me. I had nothing else with me except a small disposable bag, which is usually given out at the hospital, with things that I used while I was there. Inside, I found the blood-soaked clothes I was wearing when I was taken to the hospital. They were rolled up and packed in a separate plastic bag. I had no idea why they kept it. When the orderly wheeled me out in a wheelchair through the front door of the hospital, I was surprised to see John, who was already waiting for me, standing next to the open door of his car. I got up from the wheelchair and slowly, with great difficulty, walked towards him. John watched me awkwardly trying to get into the car without even trying to help me, and when I was inside, he closed the door and walked around the driver's side of the car. He slipped inside and we set off. Where exactly? I had no idea. As we drove, I glanced at John several times, trying to figure out how he was feeling. His blank expression meant nothing to me, and I finally turned to the window, watching without any interest as he drove me back to our house. He didn't say a word during the whole trip, and I wasn't in the mood to start a conversation with him myself. The deep sadness that permeated my soul was caused by the loss of my first child, my own personal grief over what I had done, and John's apparent indifference. I had very little hope and nothing positive in my life that could compensate for this deep melancholy. The silent, depressing ride home was a sad reflection of my current state. Upon arrival, John nevertheless helped me out of the car and walk home. Although I was surprised by this, I am still glad for even such a little help. After undergoing surgery, there were so many places inside that I barely had enough strength to get to the sofa in the living room. I sat down on it with great relief and leaned my head back, closing my eyes and breathing heavily. I felt dizzy again, and it seemed to me that I was about to lose consciousness, but, making an effort, I tried to somehow pull myself together. It took me a few minutes, but gradually I regained my strength and my breathing became less labored. Finally, I opened my eyes and saw that John was just sitting in the chair opposite and watching me. There was still no expression on his stone face. "Thank you for coming to pick me up and helping me in," I said softly. "I don't think I could have done it myself. Actually, I didn't expect to see you at the hospital, but I'm glad you were there." "No problem." I finally heard something from him. "I wanted to tell you that I'm sorry for your loss. I'm sorry you had to go through this alone, but it looks like you're going to be okay. I don't think I'll ever get better." "If you know what I mean," I replied with restraint. "But the doctor said that my body was not seriously harmed, and I will have to fully recover. It won't be long before I can take care of myself." "That's good. You can stay here until you get back to normal, but after that I want you to find another place to live. When you do, I'll help you pack up and move in. You decide what you want, and if there are any problems, we can solve them together." The coldness of John's tone and the surprise with which he made this statement took my breath away. I felt a suffocating spasm constrict my throat, and at the same time, for a few seconds, I felt dizzy and dark in my eyes, as it happens when you get to your feet too quickly. Nothing John said seemed to surprise me, but the timing and the complete lack of emotion in his voice took me by surprise. I just sat there, trying to control myself and feeling tears welling up in spite of myself. "It's good. So be it. If that's what you want, I could barely get out of myself in response. Just give me a few days to gain strength, and then I can start looking for another place to live. I promise I won't stay here any longer than necessary. I don't want to cause you any inconvenience with my presence. I couldn't resist the bitter sarcasm at the end. As I continued to speak, the long-suppressed anger began to surface. Yes, I made a mistake, and yes, I got pregnant by another man. But John's anger and coldness were more caused by his anger and hatred of his brother than by my action. I accepted his decision to divorce me, and I accepted the loss of love and trust on his part, but I didn't want to accept John's desire to take out all his anger and frustration on me. I didn't deserve this kind of treatment from him. You can stay here as long as you need to. I have no desire to force you to do something you're not ready for. I know you've suffered a great loss, and I accept that. What happened to you was a tragedy. I will help you in any way I can, but understand that you and I are no longer married, and there is no love left for you on my part, he said in the same monotone. I understand. I also know that your long-standing hatred of Bobby is what drives you now, and I have nothing to do with it. What I did out of compassion and nothing more. I repeated what I had already told him before. He was your brother, and he suffered a great loss, even greater than what I went through. I tried to help him, and that was my mistake. At that moment, I didn't understand what it meant to you, or how it could have affected you, and for that I apologize to you. But what Bobby did to you happened before me, and it was just between you and him, and that's completely different. I just found myself in the middle, as if between a rock and an anvil. John was shaking his head, but now I didn't care. I had lost everything I held dear, and now I was in no mood to show compassion again. I've already done it once, and it turned out to be a mistake. I won't do it again. I continued. I know you look at it your way, but I have my own opinion. I talked to Charity, and she told me what happened between you and Bobby because of Selena, but I had no part in it. If I had known what happened between you then, I think things would have been different. Maybe I would have seen that Bobby's actions were not what I thought they were. Perhaps I would have seen more resourcefulness and cunning in him, rather than believing that he was reacting this way because of grief and breakage. We'll never know because I didn't know anything about this part of your life with him. But I know the true reasons for my actions, and I have nothing to regret when I tried to help a grieving person as best I could. However, I'm really sorry about how all this has affected you and us, and I wish I had done something different, but now it's too late. While I was talking, he calmed down and now just sat motionless, looking at me with the same blank expression on his face. Since you are no longer pregnant, the situation has changed. I intend to file for divorce immediately. I don't see the point in waiting, do you? No, there's no reason to wait. Having said what I thought was necessary, now I also spoke dryly and dispassionately. I understand everything and will leave as soon as possible. I absolutely don't want to stay here any longer than necessary. For your information, I will not fight the divorce and I can accept any conditions that you see fit to set. John sat with his head down and his hands clasped in front of him. The silence that hung between us dragged on, but he continued to sit still, not saying a word, so I decided to end this once and for all. I was wrong about what I did, but I never wanted you to find out about it, and I absolutely didn't want it to happen again. I made a terrible mistake, but it wasn't your fault. You've never given me a reason to cheat on you or our marriage. I understand it. John just looked down at his feet and waited. I don't even know what. Perhaps to find out if I have any other requests or questions. It was clear that he had made his decision, and I would have to pay for my indiscretion. Strangely enough, this suited me. There was only one thing left to say, and now was the time for it. I want to tell you one last thing, and then you can leave. I've loved you since we first met, and I still love you. This has never changed and will never change. You were the first and will be the last man I truly love. What happened between us ended because of my actions, not because of you. I hope, John, this will give you some peace when I disappear from your life. With that, I got up from the couch and went upstairs with all the dignity I could muster. I needed to cry my heart out, but I didn't want to do it in front of John. I reached the bedroom, where, closing the door behind me, I fell on the bed and sobbed into the pillows. I didn't hear the door close when he left, but deep down I knew I was alone in the house. Yes, from now on I was left all alone. in an empty house and in a desolate life. It took me only a month to find a new apartment and move my things into it. I called Holly and she helped me pack my clothes and other things. I took only what I needed and left everything John had ever given me there. What I bought myself, but which was not particularly necessary, I also did not take. Some things were dear to me, but I left them too. All this was a part of my former life, the one that is now irrevocably gone. As a result, I only had a few boxes and my suitcases. Holly and I moved all the things ourselves, loading them into a small pickup truck that I rented. I stood in the driveway, taking one last look at the house John and I had shared for the past 5 years. When we moved here from our first apartment, John said then that this was our new beginning. Now this house meant the end. The puzzle of my life, which I associated with this place for a long time, did not work out. For the last time, I let my tears flow, washing away the collapse of my marriage. Wiping the tears from my eyelashes, I got into the car and drove away without once looking back. My choice to help Bobby was made out of compassion and love, but it was the wrong choice. A part of me understood that, but I let myself go on anyway. I didn't think about the consequences, and life hit me with all its cruelty.